to get to PowerApps, you go to make.powerapps.com. Make.powerapps.com. And then you should be able to log in using your SIUE account. And then you should come to a screen like this that just lists out different things. So for me to have an idea who is actually going to try to do it as I'm doing it. Rob is. Stacey is.
I'll see what I can do. Let's put it that way.
Okay. That way, just in case I'm waiting on people to kind of catch up or not. From there, you should be able to say create. And then I always do a blank app. I don't really like templates. Maureen has heard this over and over because I don't care about the SEP templates and things because I don't think they work as well as, you know, just starting from scratch. They kind of can limit you sometimes. There are different things that you can maybe play with. I think there's an actual like template thing down here that can get you started with different stuff. Like you want to make a budget tracking app, you can do that, or different stuff. But I don't do any of that because I found that a lot of the templates are made in a kind of different version of PowerApps as well that doesn't have as much control. So I click blank app and then I use blank canvas app. And again, they give you a couple different options. We don't actually have access to something called Dataverse. It's like SharePoint where you can save information in a server, but they don't pay well. Certain units on campus have a Dataverse, but we're not privy to those tables and things, and it would be nice, but that costs extra, so I don't deal with cost extra. I always try to do everything free. And so what I'll do is click create for the blank canvas app. From there, you can just give it a name. I'm just going to call it calculator. Doesn't really matter. And you get two choices for the format. You can choose tablet or phone. I always choose tablet because I'm usually using these on my desktop, not so much on my phone. But if you wanted to make an application that you were going to just mostly use on your phone, you can definitely do that. And it would just change the kind of size of the screen that you're building on to fit better for a mobile layout. And there are ways in the application that even if you choose a tablet, that when you access it on a phone, it can be kind of a little responsive and change so that it would work better for the phone. But I just always choose tablet. And then from there, it's just kind of get some things ready. So let's let that happen. And then let me know when you get to this kind of blank screen. Cool, everybody's there. Okay, so this is the PowerApps screen to build those PowerApps. It's blank as we picked, which is nice. There's nothing here, just a screen. And whatever is showing in this like white rectangular box is what you would see it as the application in say Teams, for example. If I pull up my applications from Teams, so for example, this rectangular box is what I would be messing with here. And of course, I had mine black. You can play with colors until you're blue in the face, because that is a whole, in some like technological sides of things, there's people whose job is just to make things look pretty, right? Like they're not so much doing all of the functionality, they're just making things look pretty, and you could spend a long time doing that. And I actually do spend a lot of time doing that, because if I'm looking at it all day, I would like it to look somewhat pretty. But obviously, the first step in any application is to get it to work first, and then make it look pretty second. Otherwise, you're just going to sit there forever playing with how something looks, and then it might not actually work, right? I've definitely been guilty of that, where I've spent a lot of time doing a lot of stuff with the look of it, and then it ultimately didn't even work the way I wanted to. And I was like, well, that's kind of a waste of time then. So who can kind of tell me what do we need to know if we want to calculate somebody's GPA? A simple question, but maybe that's just what we need to ask in order to figure out what we
Credit,
need on our screen. Okay,
credits,
credits.
quality points.
Okay.
Maybe the
So
Put on
credits and
over a
quality points.
GPA?
Say that again.
Put on over a GPA?
Yep. Their starting GPA. Yep.
Yep. Yep. And how do you get that though?
You divide their credits by you convert their GPA to a quality points or something, and then divide it by credits.
Right. So you take their earned quality points and divide it by their earned credit hours. But where do we get that information is better? Like, how do you know what their quality
Banner.
points are?
Well, the best place to get that is Banner in the Shashoja, whatever.
That's one place, right? So if we
Yeah.
go to the Banner screen and we look at Shashub, we have our own way of pronouncing these over there here. We don't want to say SHA, you know, we call it Shashub. And you put in the ID. I'll just use my own just for simplicity and look at the undergrad level. I should be able to see my earned hours and my quality points, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in theory, right, the GPA that I have should be 469 divided by 129 because I've taken 1,000,000 hours, which does go to a 3.636. Darn, accounting class got me a couple times.
Well, this
So
this doesn't include retakes. So I know you probably retook quantitative reasoning 3 or 4 times.
mm-hmm,
I was joking.
mm-hmm. I did retake accounting, yep, but that's the reason why you have to look at their GPA hours versus their earned hours or past hours. Some of that's a little bit different, right? I also, me personally, I would typically, I don't, I don't think of their Shashub screen as much as I would think of the actual transcript, so I can see what's going on.
Say. Transcripts.
So I go to their transcript under student information in here and put not that student, but myself. And so I can look at the transcript within here to see at the bottom or wherever, right? Like I don't want to include my grad courses. I want to just see. I don't know if it shows it at the bottom. Yeah. So total undergrad here, I can get the same thing, right? The GPA hours divided by or quality points divided by GPA hours. Same numbers, but that's instinctively where I go as the transcript first. So that's how you get their current GPA. And we can talk about how this is calculated because you do need to know how to do that in order to calculate their next GPA or their term GPA, right? Does anybody know how quality points are calculated? Autumn's like, yeah, I do. I do it all the time.
I do it all the time.
For those wonderful exercise science and nutrition.
Yeah, you take their grade times their credit hours to get their quality points.
Right. So if we're in a 3 credit hour class, right, and we get an A, what is an A worth though, Autumn?
4 points.
4 points. So 3 times 4 in that case would give us 12 points. And then you add up all of those points in the end. So we have to think of this as kind of 3 sections, maybe. We have to think of it as like, here's what the system already tells me, right? This is their current GPA with their quality points and earned hours. Then I need a section where I can add new courses or repeated courses like Rob was saying. So things that they're going to take in the future or currently. And we can have it use that information to do 2 things. We can have it to calculate just what their term GPA would be, which would just be the classes they're currently listing there. And then we can also have it calculate their GPA as a cumulative GPA. So we have to think about these things before we start placing stuff on the screen. Otherwise, we don't really know what to place, right? So I pretty much know I need a couple boxes to input things, right? At least 2 to begin with, just to get the basic calculation of their GPA. So I'm going to create a box to be able to enter their hours, their GPA hours, and their quality points. I'm going to create 2 boxes just to enter that information. And so to enter things onto the screen, we can go to the little plus sign on the left, or we can go up to the top where it says insert. These do the same thing. I usually use the left one because it just pulls the whole list of different things you can do up. And we're looking for a text input, something that we're actually going to input. And that happens to be right at the top because that is what you would use a lot, right? So I'm going to click it once, and we're going to have this particular box come up. Now, PowerApps is kind of going through some UI changes itself where they have what would be called classic buttons. These are kind of classic looking. And then if I went into the settings under updates, and I went here where it says modern controls and themes, I could get now kind of a more modern looking button. But I mean, it's the same thing functionally. They just look a little bit different from the box. So this one, let's just call this one our GPA hours. So what I would do is click on it. When you click on it, it's going to give it a name already over here on the right. I just call it text input 1 because it's the first text input box we put on there. But you can rename these whatever you want. And you should try to create a system for you to remember why you're naming things. It's good practice to put some kind of indication of what this is, right? If it's an input, put an input in there. If it's a button, put button, right? So that way, when you go back later, you're like, okay, that's not just a label where it's displaying information, but that's actually interactable. It's a button. It's a input box. So I would label this something like GPA hours input, but it could be anything you want, right? And then I'll hit enter so that it takes that name. I'm gonna delete the old box because I'm just going to use the classic controls for now. Because again, design doesn't necessarily matter. It's the functionality at the moment. And when I clicked on that box, the text input, you saw all of these options come up over on the right. This is how we don't have to learn so much coding because like things are just there and you can play with. And it should update it over here. If it doesn't explode first.
I think you cut out just for a second.
Yeah, my internet just kind of stagged. I didn't say anything though, Stacy, aside from it's nice that the buttons have, when you click on any object, you get all these different options pop up on the right, and you can change the color, you can change the border, you can really go to town playing with the look. But we're not going to worry so much about that. We want to just kind of get the functional parts so far. Now, I don't really want this text input to be listed on there when I'm in the app. I don't want it to say text input, right? I want to be able to put my hours in there, but I don't want it to already say text input. Does that make sense? So I'm going to erase where it says the default. I'm going to erase where it says that and just leave it blank. You don't need anything in that box. If you wanted to, you can add hint text. Hint text would be something that if you're looking at it and you click into it, the text will disappear, right? So if I click into it, that text disappears. It's just kind of there as a hint. And I put GPA hour, I meant hours. Okay. And now I want to do the same thing, but for the quality points, right? Their current quality points. I could click the button again, but it would be better for me to just maybe duplicate this one. Especially if you change anything, right? You want all your buttons to look the same. For example, if I want to like change the size of the box or whatever, I can just move it around. It does work where if I highlight the box and I press Control C and then Control V, it will copy and paste. Or you could right click, right? You can right click and say copy and then paste. So now I have a second box, but I don't want to put GPA hours in there. I want to put quality points. So I'm going to change the name of this one to QP input. I like to shorten things, right? Because you might need to use this name later. So having short names is going to be a little bit easier to work with, as long as you can remember what you named the item. And I don't want the default text to say GPA hours. Now I'll put quality points. Okay, so I got 2 boxes, right? So when I press this little play button up here by the save button, this is a preview button. This is what your app would look like or how it would function when it's inside of like Teams. And so now I can go in here and I can actually type in these boxes. I can play with it like I would if the app was live and you know, in your Teams. So I'm just going to put some numbers in there like that. That doesn't make any sense in terms of actual GPA hours. Let's go for something more realistic, right? They got 3 hours and 9 credits, or 9 quality points. 3 credit hours, 9 quality points, which means they got what letter grades for the class, Autumn? They got a B. I saw your lips. Yes, and so you know, I don't need to know that. I can just get it from their transcript. But I like knowing how GPA is calculated so that when we make this, we're actually able to verify that it is calculating it correctly. You know, the first time I ever made one of these, it was not calculating correctly, but I thought it was. And so it took a while before I was like, that doesn't make any sense, you know? And wrapping my head around what do we do to get things to work for repeats. That's a little bit challenging, and we'll get there. So I'm going to make a third box to calculate their current GPA, but I don't really need it to be an input, right? I don't need it to be an input because it should just do it based on what I have entered here. I'm not really manually changing the calculation. So in that case, instead of an input, we could just use text, or there's something called a label, text label. So I'm going to create a text label. And all that is when I go to play this, I can't interact with this. I can't change it, right? It's kind of static. And what I want it to do is take the quality points and divide it by hours. And this is the kind of fundamentals of PowerApps where you're wanting it to do things besides just show the text. And the way that you can do that is you click the label. I'm going to change the name of it to be current GPA. And again, you could put like label so that you remember that it's not an input, it's just a label, it's not a button. And what I wanted to do is take the QP input, that's what I called my quality points, and my GPA hours input, and do the calculation. Now, in actual coding, this might be a little bit tricky because you have to know how to do that. In PowerApps, we can click on the label, and instead of having it up at the top where it says text and it puts text into parentheses because that is what the text by default is, we can erase that. And now we can tell it to do things with the other boxes, right? So for example, I could say, take the quality point input, and you can see how that box turned green around it because it's saying, oh, you want this box? And I say, yeah, but what do I want about it? Because it's not sure what do you want? Like, do you want the number that's in there? Do you want the border size? Do you want the width of this box? What do you want? So we have to put a dot, and then you can say text. I want the text from that. Do you see now my label says 9 because I'm basically getting what is in that box. So if I put 50, right, it changes. If I put 9, it changes. This box here, this label is updating to be equal to the quality points. But that's not what I want, right? What do I want to do? I want to take it and divide it by the GPA hours. So in the text, we could just put a division symbol and then put GPA hours input. Again, we want the text inside of there. So something like this. So this is what we would call low coding, right? This is logical where we're just saying take the text from that box divided by the text of that box. Not really coding per se, but it is slightly coding. But it's a simple form, right? You're just saying take this box and the text that's in it and divide it by that box and the text that's in that box. Has everybody been able to get to this point? Does it make sense? Now,
I'm
I
stuck
like,
at the last one, the text one. I'm
okay,
just typing.
okay. Yeah, let me know if you catch up and if it's working for you. I do this a lot, so it's easy to me, right? But if you need me to slow down, just let me know. I don't really like how it just says 3 though. My brain doesn't work with that, right? GPAs are usually rounded out to 3 decimal points. Now you could leave it like this. And I think our actual GPA calculator that we have on the Teams page doesn't really do the full, it will just say 3 when it's an exact even number. But let's do something that doesn't have an even number. So let's say they had 6 hours and they ended up with, I don't know, what would make sense? 9 plus 3. Oh, that's even as well. Whatever, we can, if let's say somehow they got 11 quality points out of it. That doesn't actually make sense, but until you get a bunch of them in there, it's gonna be an even number for a while. But now you can see now it's just going on for decimals forever. And I still don't like that because I want it to be reflective of what the actual GPA is. And so how many of you have ever done like Excel formulas in Excel? It works similar to that, where we can add to our text box here where we have the division going on, and we can give it kind of like things, like we can say round up, round down, and when we do something like that, we would wrap it in parentheses, right? So we can say round, but we need more than just that. We need to know how many digits, right? So we need the number, which is what we got here, and we need to know how many digits. And so we could say 3, and that will give us the 3 decimal place. If we said 0, that's just going to give us everything beside the decimal place. And of course, we could have had it do the round up. So I just did round, which should work. But if you want to say round up, it's the same kind of thing. So that way it'll be rounding up. Now, in this case, it went from 1.833 to 1.834. That doesn't work with our GPA, right? Because a 0.33333 shouldn't be rounding up. They just cut it off. It doesn't round up. So I just leave it as round for us. Make sense? So this is just how you can get current GPA. It's the simplest thing that we can do in here, where we have 2 boxes and we want them to divide themselves. The next portion of it would be to actually then enter courses, right? Enter some courses and then basically have these boxes again, but recalculated for their new GPA. And that gets a little tricky because in order to calculate their new GPA, you need to know how many credit hours, and then have it calculate quality points for that. I made a version of this, as you can remember. Let me go back to it. This is how I thought of it when I made it. GPA quality points give me the current GPA, right? And then I have a static number of courses here because it's not easy to like dynamically add courses. So I just have 8 because how often are students really going to take more than 8 classes? But obviously you can have as many as you want. And I have run this out before because we're also, I was talking about it with a student who had summer and fall classes, and we were kind of predicting what their GPA might get to in the end, right? This is also how I use the GPA is like, you haven't taken these courses. What do you need to get in order to get a 3.0, right? And so I ran out here, but you can easily combine courses, right? You can say, they're in 6 hours, I'll just put 6 credit hours here. It works the same as long as we think they're going to get the same grades, right? If they're going to get A's, whether I wrote it as 6 and then an A, or 3 and 3 and A, that's the same thing. So, because it's going to times it by the number of credit hours. So there are ways in which you could either have more boxes in here or just think of it a little bit differently in terms of how you group classes together. So you can see there's a lot of boxes, but it's supposed to work like this, right? If they have a 3 and 9, that means they took one class and got a B. So if they repeat that course and they get an A from it, and we actually say it's repeated, and previously they got the B, now it's a 4, right? Now, this is how I thought of it, but you can think of it in a different way, right? We can have it, you could put the repeat first on the left side and then the next one. Because oftentimes when people use this, they come back and they're like, okay, is this the repeated grade or is this the repeated grade? Because the way I've written it as repeated doesn't really tell you, like, is this the repeated grade or is this? And obviously if you put B here and A here, well, their GPA goes down, which means that they actually had a B previously and they actually had an A previously and they repeated and got a B. So their GPA would go down. And that doesn't actually calculate or make sense because of the quality points we had before, right? Like if they had an A previously, they would have had a 4.0 here. So just something to think about, like when you're building these for yourself, you can do it however it makes sense to you. But when you're using it for other people, you're going to get like 20 different ways that people might lay that out a little bit differently.
It's interesting, Caleb, when you were showing us your GPA calculator, I was initially thinking that all you needed to do is mark it as repeat. But
Yeah.
I see the reason why you need the grade also, because you're deducting those quality points from the original number, which
Right.
is not intuitive when you're thinking about this initially.
Yeah, and it wasn't when I first started, I didn't really understand how this was even working. I had to sit with Danita had made an Excel calculator. And I'm like, what is it doing? Like all the time as a student, I didn't really understand the concept of if you repeat a course, that's actually going to improve your GPA faster than if you just take a new course, right? Like if we didn't repeat this class and you ended up with an A in a new class, your GPA is only at a 3.5, right? Like you've only just improved it by a little bit versus that repeat. And so trying to logically figure out why do I need that? What do I need to calculate this? Isn't that simple? And I'm kind of surprised that they expect people to know how to do this in FST 101.
Yeah.
Autumn knows. Who has taught that class? Just Autumn and me?
So far.
Yeah, and some other people, but not in this office. Evan's here. Okay, sorry, Evan. I didn't even see you were up there. But being able to try to convey that to students might be a little bit challenging. I don't know how you guys have worked that out, but it's not that intuitive that you have to figure out how many quality points to deduct away. And I mean, I think in terms of FST, they're just mostly teaching how to calculate a term GPA, one GPA, and you don't have to factor in repeats, which is nice. But you can see over here on the left, I've put in, okay, this is how many quality points they're going to have and how many GPA hours they're going to have right after taking the course. Then it spits out what is their GPA for the semester Well, they only had one A, so that would be a 4.0. And then their new cumulative GPA, which is going to average in their old GPA with their new class. So those are what I find useful. But you can see I didn't round anything here. I would like to. I don't like when it just says 3, right? It makes you wonder if there's a mistake. Like we never see it as just 3. It's always 3.000, right?
Yeah.
So you can do that as previously I showed. So before we get into all of that and how to add in courses and then have it calculate the new GPA, anybody not get to this point? Kijong, did you get there? Cool. And you can see now like why labeling your boxes with specific names is kind of important, because I'm going to use those later here to put into to do something with. In terms of my application, every box I put on the screen, there's hundreds of them, has a name. Some names are stupid, right? Like I basically say C1 for class 1, C2, C3, because it's the same thing just over and over and over. But it's a way for me to be like easily identify each box and what it is supposed to be doing. When I can be descriptive, I'll try to be. But you'll see in a second when I add those new classes, how many ever I want to add, I might use a little bit of a different description just so that it's easier to kind of have it add up the stuff. If you do the same name 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., it becomes much easier to keep track of. So
yeah, that's really interesting, because I think like in this simple scenario, our naming convention isn't as important. But
right.
when you have lots and lots of boxes and you're trying to reference a particular one, that's when the naming convention becomes really important. Yeah.
Yeah, before when I first started, I didn't rename them. So whatever the box gave as a
Yeah.
default, which when you're duplicating things, right? So if I
Right. Oh,
duplicate
yeah.
this, it's just going to put _1. And now I do it
Yeah.
again, it says _2. So it kind of tries to keep with what you're doing,
Yeah.
but it's not going to get that right. And so now that's confusing, right? What is QP input 1 versus _1 versus _2? And I don't even like that they do that, right? Because this should be number 2, but they underscore it 1. So the
Right.
main
I
one
see.
and then underscore. So yeah, I think starting from the beginning with a good understanding that naming things is important. The more boxes you get, the more important it'll be. Obviously, a one screen application, not too difficult, but later on it can be quite challenging. So I'm going to add a couple more inputs so that we can think about courses. Now on this application, this box here is really not important at all, right? The course name has no effect on how the GPA calculates. It's just there for us to be able to keep track of what classes I'm talking about, right? But in terms of actually calculating a GPA, you don't really need this. It's if you're using it to talk to a student or you can't keep track yourself, then yeah, this is nice. But oftentimes when I'm trying to calculate a quick GPA, I don't put anything in here, right? And I don't even necessarily separate them all out. I could say, okay, you got 15 hours this semester. If you get A's in all of them, this is where you're going to be. But the trick there is making sure that you understand that if you put 15 credit hours and you put A, we're meaning all 15 hours would be A's. So that's 5 classes, right? 5
Yeah.
classes at an A. And you could do like the same thing, but say they got some B's. So you can do calculations differently, which have nothing to do with the course name here. So I'm not going to put the course name in for just now. I'm just going to add in another box. I'm going to scoot it over. And what should I call this? If we're going to start having options to add courses, what should I call this? That's
Is that
kind
your
of
first box
challenging.
for adding courses?
Yeah, so this is my first GPA hour for a new class. What could I call it that might be a good way to do this?
Did you copy the text or did you copy
I copied the box.
okay, the button? Okay.
Yeah, this is a input box. Yeah, I copied it. It doesn't matter. I could have grabbed a new one, right? So I could have just said input and grabbed a new text input here. That's the modern one, so I don't want that. Let me go to my settings and just turn that off because I only just showed you because there's a lot of new buttons out there too. And I don't know if when you start yours, you might have something set to new by default. So yeah, I could have copied it, or I could have just grabbed a new one. Usually I'm just copying things because if I get the button to look the way I want it, then I don't have to keep doing the steps over and over and over, right? Because you might play with a bunch of these settings in here for different colors and borders and backgrounds and things. And if you have to do that for all of them, it's going to get annoying. So I just practically copy everything and then just adjust it, right? So what I might name this box would be like class 1 GPA, right? But that's a lot to write for every class. So I might do something like course 1. So just a C for course 1, and then G1, right? Like something like that. Or you could say course GPA 1. There's lots of ways to go about naming this, but whatever you do, keep it consistent. So the more class hours I add, and usually I'll rename this to like credit hours or something. The more credit hours I add, more classes I add, I would change this name to be 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, right? So that way I have a bunch of them. Now you can just spam. Let's just do a couple here. Right, I just have a 6 of these, and it'll try to rename them, but I'll typically go through and just rename them the way I want so that they're all in order, right? So this one's 3, this one is 4, because I don't really like their automatic naming because it gets a little bit weird. 5 and 6. Okay, so we have
I
all
do
of
like
the
how it
credit
has
hours.
the thing where you can make sure you're putting them right underneath each other. I am a
Yeah,
fan
it
of that.
snaps it. Yeah, it snaps it. You can
Yeah.
also hold down shift and click all of them. So that way you have them all highlighted. And then if you right click, you can do align. And there's like a distribute vertically button, which will try to space them out evenly if you're a little OCD about having things evenly spaced. I don't necessarily find that always works. Sometimes the pixels don't quite line up. So one will be actually like in my eyes, this gap here is actually a little bit bigger than this one, but whatever. You could spend a long time playing with the placement of things. And that's a good point to bring up is however we place the items here is how they are in the app. Okay. That would be coordinate and the Y coordinate.
You cut out again. I'm not sure what's going on over there.
I don't either because you all look fine to me.
Well, you didn't pay your internet bill.
I'm working at the school today, so they didn't pay their internet bill. And Stacey and I are right next to each other, so why is my internet doing it and not yours? So anyway, you can line them up like that, and this is the hours, so new class hours, right? So I can start listing them out, and then I need the exact same amount for quality points, but I'm not going to type in the quality points, right? I don't want to type in the quality points. I could, right? I could say, okay, well, they took this 3 credit hour class and they got an A. So that would be 3 times 4, which is 12, right? I could do that. But that is allowing yourself to create issues where you're going to make mistakes. I'd rather pick or type in a letter grade, right? And have it calculate the quality points. Make sense? Because we know what letter grades are. And so in this application, I had the letter grades as drop downs. So they're drop down menus. You could make it a text input and they can just type in the letter grade. It would work the same. But there's something about being able just to select a course grade from a list that is a little bit better. This doesn't actually work for everything though, because there are other letter grades than just what's in here. Sorry, I have a tickle in my throat. But as far as I'm aware, pretty much none of the other ones are going to affect their GPA except for WF, right? But WF and a UW and an F in this case, they all count exactly the same. So I mean, I don't even really need the UW because it's just going to count as an F. So I could just click F. It doesn't really need anything else. So we could just type a letter grade here, or we could have a drop down, which there happens to be a pre-made item called drop down. So if I click that, yay, I have a drop down, but it's going to default with 1, 2, and 3. I don't want that, right? I want the letter grades. So if I click on the item, and you can see that it should say items here, right? What are the items within the drop down? And it gives us drop down sample. And that's just a pre-made table that includes those values, 1, 2, and 3. We don't want that. I'm going to delete that out. And I could create an item to have that. So if we want to make a table, we could. But the best way I found to do these are to put them into brackets like this, which is a symbol that stands for table. And I can list in double quotes the text that we want and separate them by commas. And then F. So this is how I can make a table of text, basically, right? So we have an A, then comma B, comma C, comma D, comma F. And they all need to be independently in quotes. If you don't put the quotes, it's going to give you some kind of error. So this is what an error looks like. You know, it's got a little red squiggly line under it, kind of like Microsoft Word or whatever. It's like, hey, something's wrong here. We also
That's
get
because
this
the
dot up.
quotes.
Yep, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to ask you. That's because if you don't put the quotes, it's actually referencing something, right? That's what.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Right. Because earlier when we did this, we didn't put quotes here, right?
Mhm.
Because it's looking for some item we have in this thing called G, which doesn't exist, right? It says G isn't recognized. There's no item called G. Whereas if I named this box G, it would find it. It'd still give us an error because it's like, what? It's not a compatible type. What do you want from it, right? And I would have to tell it text. Again, I would have to say the text. So now whatever text I've added to this box down here would actually show up inside of here, right? It would work. But your logic is correct there, that is, without the quotations, it is looking for an item called that. And that didn't exist until I just made it exist. So I'm going to change my naming back because I don't want that to be called that. Number 6. And so now we can see we have a list with all the different grades that they could get. I don't really like the shape of this box. It doesn't fit the thing we've got going, so I can stretch it and move it around however I want, right? So I don't want this. I want this. So now we have a class, GPA hours 1, and now we have what would be their quality points. But really, it's going to get their quality points from this, right? So we can think of this in a couple ways. Like here in this application, when we put in the letter grade, it does actually calculate the quality points here. But that's not interactable. I can't change that number. I can only change it by changing it here. And so you don't have to have a box to show this. I only have the box there to make sure that it's working correctly. Right? I can see, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. but you don't have to show it. You could just have hours and the letter grade, and that's it. If you want to simplify it and just not have it show this box. That's up to you and how you design your own thing. But I am going to create a box. I'm going to put it on the other side instead of the side that it was on, just so that I can show you how to get this A to calculate as 4 points and a B to calculate as 3 points and so on.
Okay, so did you just create just a regular text input box?
For the drop down,
No, the one you just created.
I just copied the box, the text input box. Yep.
Okay.
And I'm going to change the name of this text input box to be, I usually still stay with the C because that stands for course, but I'm going to say QP as capital letters and 1. So it's the first course's quality points. However you think what makes sense to you, right? Similarly, the drop down, I could have said C for course and say like LG for letter grade 1. We probably don't care what, how you call these, but just find a way to name them. And so basically now what I needed to do is get this box to give me this selected item, and that has to reference, it has to figure out how to call it 4 points, even though I called it an A. And then this one be times by that, right? What's up, Rob?
So you copied a text input box, and I assume we're going to want to change this in the future. Is there a way to change that box from the properties? I didn't see it initially, but
For what?
oh, format text. Okay, but because right now it's an input box. Right?
Yeah, okay, that's a good point. Right. So we could have just made it a label, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Or if you don't want them to interact, even though it's a text input, right? Like, because we don't want them to change the quality points necessarily. What you would do if you still want it to be a text input so it can look like the rest of them, there's an option in here under display mode where it says edit. You can change it to view, which means they can view this item, but they can't change it. So that's another way. Like you could have made it a text label like we did over here, or you could still make it a text input, but just change the setting from edit to view or disabled. There's also a disabled option, right? So you could change it to disabled, which kind of grays it out. That's pretty much what I did here. It's still a text input, but it's disabled. So they can't change it. And that's something we can talk about in the future where you can have certain things disable at certain times. For example, in the declaration app, right? This button is disabled. It is disabled until the people enter something into enough of these boxes. They've got to have, I think, let's see.
Three boxes, yeah.
Well, I think you have to do the update. Since you added those check boxes at the top, you have to do that.
No,
it's got to have an email, so it's got to have an @ symbol, a valid email.
Okay, yeah, you're right. There it goes, right?
Yeah.
So it's now updated to be editable or clickable, right? Whereas before it was disabled until enough of the data was entered. Similarly, these are disabled, right? Nothing in here is clickable unless I say that they're not undeclared and I want to change their from major. Something as simple as a little toggle there to turn these on. So you can see that that's kind of where we would want to get with certain things, especially if other people are using your application. Okay, and so we're at a point now where we need to be able to tell this box what is in this box. And based on what we talked about before, you should be able to just go like this, right? And it's going to say, well, what do you want? And so if I put my little dot, now it doesn't give me just text. It says selected text, which sounds better, right? Like, yeah, I want the one that's selected, not everything in there, but it's still not enough. And if I put another dot, oh, okay, you want the selected text as value, because this table could have had more than just one thing. We just have one value, but maybe think about it like an Excel table, right? You could have one row with multiple values, so it needs to know exactly what are you wanting. And we just want the value from it at the moment, right? And that gives us a duplicate. Okay, so yay, I got an A, I got a B, I got a C, but that's not quite enough, right? Because I can't just say, okay, now that I got this D, take that and times it by the GPA input of the course one, right? So course one GPA dot text. That isn't going to work, right? D cannot be converted to a number. You can't times D by a number. So we have to be able to tell it, okay, if this text is equal to something, then give it this. Okay, so this is where Excel kind of comes into handy. And I'm going to drop down this menu so that our box can be bigger. You can make this bigger. And we could do if statements. So we could say if this text value, right, is equal to D, then let's give it a value of, how many does a D get? 1, right? And then after that calculation is done, times it by that. So in theory, when I say, I'll go back to it, Stacy. When I say D, it's going to give it a 1, times it by the credit hours, and we get 3. That's correct, right? But I don't want just D, right? But here's the thing again. I don't want just D, because D is not enough. I need A, B, C, D, F, right? So I need to be able to kind of nest these, they call it nesting, nest these equations together. So I would, after end, so this is an if statement. You give it a statement. So if this is equal to D, then 1. If I put another comma in there, that's an else statement. So if it's equal to a D, then 1. Else, you could ask it again. So what I can do here is add in the other grades. I could say, well, okay, if it's not a D, what about an A? And an A would be 4, right? I'm going to take away the last comma. So now I have two situations. If it's an A, give it 4. If it's a D, give it 1. And we're going to look and see if that works. So A, yeah, 4 times 3 is 12. And a D, 3 times 3 is, or 3 times 1 is 3. But B and C and F, they don't work yet, because I haven't told those letters. When you do these like nested things, it can easily get confusing, right? Because I put the D before the A. That looks funny. So I would, because I'm a little OCD, I would change the order. I would put the A first, right? And then the next one I would do would be the B, which would have been 3 points. And I would press enter between these so that they're actually on different lines. That extra little bit of space doesn't change anything. So I can space this out as much as I want, and it's fine with enter. So I would do this, right? And then I would put a comma. The next line, I would just copy everything here. And this is my C, the third one. And that gives you 2 points. Each C gives you 2 points. The next one is going to be the D, which gives you 1 point. Oops. And then the last one is F, and it gives you 0. We won't need the final comma because there's no more after that. Okay, so I threw a lot at you for the last little bit there. And that's why I'm recording this too, right? So that way you can
I'll
look
definitely
back.
have to come back because my thing is now doing this. So
Spinning, yeah,
yeah.
that happens. Yeah, that can happen. I've found that Microsoft Power Apps works better in Microsoft Edge actually than Chrome. Once you get hundreds of boxes on here, it can kind of slog down a little bit. And I found that Chrome is a little bit slower with processing all of that than Microsoft's own browser is. Big shock, right? It's a Microsoft product. So I will oftentimes do this in Edge when I have a lot going on. Rob, I just discussed nesting these if statements, which means like it's kind of like Excel, where it's like if it's an A, it's 4. Otherwise, if it's a B, it's 3. Otherwise, if it's a C, it's 2, et cetera, et cetera. And you can put as many of these in here as you want. That part does take time to learn, especially if you're combining things. You're like, what about if it's this and this, or this and this, and you can kind of get a little bit complicated there. Does this generally make sense to people other than just needing to kind of do it a couple times?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to come back to that because it's still doing
Okay.
that. But I'll ask you any questions if I have them when I
So,
go back to look at it.
okay. So for the last bit here, let me show you that it does work, right? So we have a 3 credit hours here, and we know that that is being times by that if statement. And we could have done it the other way, right? Here we could have, I put the times at the end. You could have put this at the beginning. It would work the same, right? If I would have said, take the GPA hours in the first GPA block and times it by this, don't delete the F or the IF, that works the same, right? Whether you times it in the front or the end, we know math works that way. And so now if I do 3 and we pick A, that should be 12 because it's 4. And then B would be 9. C would be 6. D would be 3. And F would be 0. So that is correct. Everybody follow? Once you get this to work, it is pretty simple to just go copy, paste, and now I got a second one, right? And I want to change this to be a 2. And I want to change this to be a 2.
Does this auto save?
It does
Yes.
at some points, yeah. But to actually get it to work, we'll talk about that in the future. There's this publish button that will actually be able to use it outside of here.
Okay.
But just, yeah, go ahead.
Because mine did not save when it came back, so I'll go back and do all this again to get it to save.
Okay. Rob?
Yeah, it's interesting. You had to copy or select both. I was wondering how you were going to use in Excel. I just highlight and copy or whatever. I wasn't sure how you were going to copy that same formula for multiple iterations of
Yeah.
the.
So, yeah. So when I copied that box that had the formula in it, we can see that it's right here. It attempted to change it, right? It changed this to a 2 because now that box is a 2. And so it is sometimes trying to figure it out. But here's the problem, right? It didn't know that I now want this one, right? It's thinking, okay, we'll take these numbers and no, I want this one, right? Which is a simple fix because I've named them well. So all I got to do is change the 1 to a 2. And yay, now this one's working across the board as well. So if I put 3 here, it's going to do the same thing. Cool, right? And so it is simple to kind of, recreate them for each box that you do.
If you would have
I
grabbed
think
all 3 of them and copied, would it have kept the same?
good. Let's see. I'm gonna delete these extra ones, but yeah, let's copy this and paste. In the past, it wouldn't have, but they may have changed things. Yeah, so it looks like it did, and I can tell because of how it's highlighted, right?
Yeah.
Now I don't want that name, so if I go click on this and change it to a 3, which is what I want. The nice part is it is smart enough to keep, it's not going to keep the old name, right? It updated the new name because I changed the box name. I would do the same for this one too. So yeah, you don't have to constantly recreate things. It can sometimes do that for you, as long as you're copying them together like that. In the past, it didn't work quite like that, but I guess they've gotten a little bit better with these. So in the spirit of not using all of your lunch break, I'm going to stop there and I'm going to save this. And then next time we can kind of continue on. If you want to build out this portion of it, kind of get it set up for how many ever classes you want to add up to for a general GPA calculator. And maybe if you want to see, how do we get it to add up this and these, right? We need those numbers. We need the total hours that they are taking now and the quality points to be able to calculate their next GPA, their new cumulative GPA. If you want to play around and see if you can get it to work, that'd be cool. But it's not that hard. It just see if you can get it to put it into another box over here somewhere. Or if you think of a different layout, you can do this all over the place, a little bit different. All right. Any questions about anything?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank
So I think our
you.
next meeting will be a couple weeks from now, but I'll look on the calendar and send it out on the group. All right.
Thank
Have a good
you.
day.
Bye.
Bye.
Like,